Lately, I've been talking a lot about my existing relationship because I think there's so much I can share from what I'm learning in this relationship. And my hope is it makes a difference in your life as well. Now, I know I'm going to talk about emotionally unavailable men because I was an emotionally unavailable guy for a very long time until I met my beloved. And why I'm sharing this with you is that when I think back to going through a divorce almost 20 years ago and going through my emotional devastation of losing my job and my finances and all that stuff, my identity was pummeled. My identity was pummeled. And a lot of men have experienced this in the last 20 years. So if you're in midlife, and you're seeking, someone at this stage, it's totally different than those in of us, those it's different than when we were in our 20s and 30s. For those of us in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, we have more life experience and because of these life experiences, we've also had many ups and downs. And after one of my big, gigantic downs after my divorce and my identity crisis, I found myself so emotionally unavailable. Now, here's the thing. I wanted companionship, I wanted connection, I wanted sex, but I didn't have the capacity to commit to another human being. And because of this, I didn't show up. I think I showed up rather selfish in the dating marketplace. And I started this conversation by telling you about my current relationship is because for the first time, maybe in the first time of my life, I'm operating from a place of how can I give instead of how can I receive. And I want to share with you some of the granular things that's gotten us both to this place. And let me just share this. She is an equal participant in this. It's not the man leading the charge and she just sits in her feminine energy and waits for me to take the lead. We are in a space of co creation with one another. But I want you to write the following two things down because I think this is something that you may want to pay attention to when it comes to choosing men in your life. And that is, we operate from two places. And there's more than two places, but two places I want to talk about today. We operate from a place of intentionality and we operate from a place of substance. Substance. So, intentionality and substance. So, what do I mean about this? Well, we are very intentional about being life partners to one another. See, an emotionally unavailable person isn't intentional about what they want. They might want that surface companionship, connection, and sex. They might even offer some level of monogamy and a commitment, or monogamy and exclusivity within that container. But a person who really wants a life partner is intentional about that experience. Now, why are they intentional about it? Because when you think about a life partner, this is a person I want to spend the rest of my life with. So the way I operate and the way she operates, and I'm going to say this, it's really important that this is a two-lane street between the two of us, is that we're intentional about our communication to one another and we are substantive. Okay, there's substance. What I mean to say is, she asks me a lot of the tough questions that most dating coaches will tell you never to ask in the early stage of dating because it's all about attraction, it's all about entertainment, it's all about romance, it's all about physical connection. Yes, our current dating environment is focused on pleasure and not the real substance because throughout history, we've operated from a place of pleasure as the entry point. What pleasure is it usually? Men chase physical connection because it's pleasurable. In fact, men used to have to wait for marriage, they used to have to offer something substantive to actually get that physical pleasure. Now we can get physical pleasure without any trust being built, without any real connection with another human being. In fact, I recently spoke to a woman who told me she had sex. They had a very long 6, 7 hour date, and at the end of the date, she had sex, and then he ghosted her. And she wants to operate from this place of life partnership, but her actions didn't. Well, and there's, by the way, she openly admitted she was in it for the pleasure. And not that this is a consequence of pleasure, but when you're focused on pleasure instead of substance, instead of being intentional, it can be radical difficult. It can be challenging to have that substantive intentional relationship. Now, one of the things we do in our relationship habitually that I want to talk about right now, because emotionally unavailable people rarely do this. Whether you're a man or woman watching this, this is equal for both genders, okay? They rarely talk about what I call, how did we get here? Where are we? How do we want to feel? And where do we want to go? How did we get here? Where are we? How do we feel? And where do we want to go? Okay, so within the container of how do we get here, that's the past, okay? In other words, I want you to think about this for a second. Oh, by the way, my coffee, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. I make the world go around. What do you do? I used to think this was a narcissistic mug, and I realized coffee makes the world go around. So I'm having coffee this morning. Excuse the sip. So I want you to think about it. For those of us in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, we've had a fair amount of life experience. And think about it. If we don't get a sense of someone's past, it's like opening up a book, a story, and starting at chapter, 20 instead of learning about chapters 1 through 20. So how did we get here? What we do is we talk about our experiences that brought us to where we're at today. We talk about our past relationships. And we didn't do this just in the beginning. Months into this relationship, we continue to revisit our past because we're trying to get a sense of the story that we weren't a part of. I want you to think about that. Look, I met her in my 60s, okay? I had 60 years of life experience that she doesn't know anything about me. She had 60 years of life experience I didn't know about her. The only way I'm going to learn about it is if we talk about it, and we talk about it regularly because there was so much to the story before we met one another, okay? We talked about our marriages. Let me reframe that. We talk about our first marriage to one another. And when I say talk, we didn't talk about it. We talk about it. In other words, not past tense, we still talk about some of the nuance, some of the experiences, how it has formed our lives. We each had 2 significant relationships before our relationship together. We talk about this regularly, so it makes us understand how we feel about things. I can't know how she feels today without understanding what got her to this place. She can't know who I am if she doesn't understand how did I get to this place. Emotionally unavailable men and women, they rarely do this. They rarely talk about their past from an introspective perspective, an introspective perspective. See, we operate from an introspective place because it gives us insight into how we operate today, So, how did we get here? That's the past. The present is, where are we? And how do we want to feel? Where are we? In other words, we visit the relationship. We talk about our feelings and where we're at today to see if we're on the same page. Do we want to, is this something we want to continue with? That's the future, by the way. But we spend time talking about this. So there's no doubting, where's this relationship going? See, emotionally unavailable men and women, they don't want to talk about where it's going because, again, they're happy with the companionship. They're happy with the connection. They're happy with the sex, or maybe they're not even happy with that. But there are no real deep roots of trust. We can't build trust if we don't talk about where is this going to go. If you have to ask where this relationship is today, if you're feeling doubt, if you're feeling uncertainty, then how do we satisfy that? We ask questions. We ask the person to open up on an emotional level. And more importantly, we want to find out what each other's needs are in the present. What are your needs? Because honestly, a romantic relationship outside of the transactional components of it, and by the way, every relationship has an exchange of energy. There's a transaction that goes on. My sweetheart likes to cook. It's one of her favorite things. And in the effort of reciprocity, I clean the dishes afterwards. She makes effort, I make effort. By the way, relationships that lack a level of reciprocity, and it doesn't have to mean you're doing the same things, it's just there's an exchange of energy between the two of you. So we talk about our relationship because we want to make sure that we're meeting each other's needs. That's the whole point of relationship. You know, it's fascinating. I was talking to a female friend of mine this morning, and when I asked her to recite 30 of her needs in relationship, she was like a deer in the headlights. When I asked her to describe 30 feelings she wants to experience when it comes to a life partner, she was a deer in the headlights. I can't begin to tell you how many women come to me, Jonathon, I know what I want. I know what I want. I know what I want in a relationship. They all think they know. Then they go through this proprietary coaching program I created. And can you guess what they say every single time? Why didn't my parents teach me this? Why didn't I learn this in school? Why didn't I learn this before I married the wrong person? I'm going to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you think of relationships in an esoteric, in a nebulous, in the clouds kind of perspective, all based on pleasure. All based on pleasure. Very few of you actually get really granular in what needs do you have in a relationship and what feelings you want to experience. Now, we could say feelings are all about pleasure, but I'm going to tell you one of the most important needs or feelings everybody wants to have is a feeling of safety. That's not pleasure. That's feeling like you don't have to feel like you're out of control. You want to be with someone that you can count on, that you can build trust with one another. And how can you build trust with one another if you don't talk about how did you get here? Where are we? Where do we want to feel? And lastly, where do we want this to go? My girlfriend and I talk about this frequently. We're talking about living together. We're talking about a future together. We're talking about, and when I say talking, we're actually making plans to looking to, we actually have visited, well, we've only visited one place now. Oh, shoot, it reminds me, I'm supposed to make plans for another. We visited one place to look at possibly living together, what that would feel like. And we're actually putting a bucket list together of places radically expensive just to put in our vortex something exciting, something that feels like it's bigger than where we're at today. We're looking at the relationship from where do we want it to go, but not only just from a physical standpoint, where do we want our relationship to go on a spiritual standpoint, from a growth standpoint. In fact, we've lined up a couple spiritual retreats to go to and personal development workshops and self-help workshops. We're both interested in Greg Braden's workshop and even Marianne Williamson's and Abraham Hicks, just to name a few. I wish Wayne Dyer was still around. I wish Ram Dass was still around. Those two are one of my favorites because they seem like they come from a place of love. So, but these are things, where do we want to go? What do we want to experience, including travel and other things, and finding out how each other feels from a place of intentionality, from a place of substance. The other thing is, and I think this is critically important for emotionally available people to do, is to come from like having a foundation of trust between one another. Trust. In fact, one of the first requests my girlfriend said to me, I will never forget this now. She said, Jonathon, whatever we do in our relationship, I always want us to come from a place of love, but more importantly, say what you mean what you say kind of thing. In other words, your actions match your words, because that's how you build trust with another person. See, sadly, many people build trust in a fantasy realm. It's all, well, let me reframe that. They build artificial intimacy, artificial trust through a lot of text messaging with one another and a lot of cyber communication instead of experiencing life together in a variety of areas. When you see how a person reacts in a variety of different circumstances, without seeing someone in a variety of different circumstances, whether it's spending time with family and friends, whether it's traveling together, maybe it's social activities, hobbies, mutual interests. To see people in different circumstances and different environments gives you a sense of their emotional availability. See, no longer are the days where we need to be in relationship from a place of dependency. Now, it's a place of, am I in service to someone else's needs? That's what love is really about, is to be in service of someone else's needs. Now, I know many of you ladies might be there watching this, and some of you men feel this too, is you give more in the relationship than the other person does. By the way, if there's an imbalance in an area of reciprocity, the exchange of energy, if there's an imbalance, then wouldn't that invite conversation? See, the problem I've observed with men and women is many of you don't have clarity on what do you actually need in relationship, what you want to feel in relationship, and because you don't have clarity in this, it's communicating those needs to another human being can be radically difficult. It's one of the reasons why I recommend the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, to learn how to communicate your needs, wants, and desires in a way that can be seen, heard, and understood. See, that's part of emotional availability as well. See, it almost requires ninja level relationship skills to be in relationship today, because most of us we're scratching the ant's belly when it comes to emotional maturity and relationship skills. And yet here's the problem. I've noticed most everybody thinks everybody else is the problem. They don't look in the mirror and say, I'm not good at this. In fact, I spent 2 hours on the phone with a dear friend, and after literally what felt like beating her up, she's like, I get it. I'm not good at this. And she thought she was a master at her emotions and feelings. But when I asked her to articulate them, she was like, I don't know. Like, she was literally a deer in the headlights. And we're talking about an intelligent, bright, vivacious human beings. We haven't been trained to do this. It requires rolling up our sleeves. First, it requires going inward into knowing who you are, knowing your negative patterns, your fears, your limiting beliefs, your insecurities, how our actions can affect another human being, and how judgmental we humans are. It's fascinating. We human beings operate from a place oftentimes of such judgment and not really focused on what we want from a heart-centered, compassionate place. It's one of the reasons why I get so many accolades from my clients, so grateful that I challenge them in areas that nobody else has ever done. That's why I love my private coaching. And if you need some support with that, reach out to me. It's fun to work with you. This is fun to me, is dismantling all of the scripts, all of the garbage that has accumulated in our lives. It's so fun. It's like walking into a hoarder's home and saying, let's clean this place up. I know you don't think that about yourself, but many of you, that's where you're at. And I know this from personal experience as well. Because as I started this conversation, I said I was a train wreck for a very long time. And it wasn't until I started to adopt this, my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? A Journey of Personal Development, Self-Help, and Spiritual Work. I'm inviting everyone to lean into that for themselves. So, what's the key takeaways from today? Emotionally unavailable people, whether men or women, lack oftentimes intentionality and substance. They're mostly focused on the pleasure. And when you focus on pleasure, like a broken clock, sometimes it works, but rarely does it turn into anything more substantive, because when you're focused on pleasure instead of being intentional and having substance behind it, then you most likely will have what you don't want instead of what you do want. Is this sinking in? Is this resonating with you? Please let me know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Post a comment below. I do my best to read them all in the first 24 hours. As always, if you find value in my conversations, please hit that like button. Please share this video. Please subscribe to either my group, Midlife Love Mastery, or even on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. All right, I'm going to sign off this video as I always do. First off, give myself a big, gigantic Jonathon bear hug of self-love. I'm going to reach into the camera and give you a hug of love if that's okay. I'm going to ask you to turn to someone, a pet, teddy bear, a pillow. Give it or them a hug of love, because hugs are a great source of love. And let's face it, we could all use more love in our lives. Bye-bye. Have a good one. Bye now.